South believe that the EU should remove all sanctions on Burma, Myanmar to counteract the influence of China. Without any further ado, I would like to call on the Prime Minister to open the debate.
Finally, to our audience. Now, I would like to move on from this debate by first defining what we mean by sanctioning. Sanctioning means any kind of stop in interaction economically, any kind of trade, or any kind of foreign investment. What China is doing is exactly the opposite. They trade and then invest in foreign investment, they do interaction economically, and that enforces in many other ways the fact that China has so much influence in how Myanmar is growing today. And we think that's a bad thing. What EU is doing today is very counterproductive. They actually want to change someone into being a democratic society by actually shutting them off, by no communication, no any kind of interaction, or building any kind of leverage. We believe in this house, on the proposition side, that this very economic tie is one of the very possible way that you can actually change democratization within Myanmar itself. Now, let me first talk about the status quo within China, within Myanmar, right? We believe that Myanmar is actually only democratic by name. The election that was hosted in 2010 never give any kind of opportunity for the opposition to win. We believe that even though Aung San Suu Kyi is already out of arrest, she still has no political ability to enter any kind of election or political platform. We don't think the existence, the very reliance on China actually has any kind of positive influence in moving or pushing the democracy in this transitioning state forward. In my speech, I would like to prove to you two things. First, I would like to prove to you how China influence slowed down the movement of this very democracy in China. And secondly, why trade liberalization and actually interact economically with Myanmar itself will be the only way for EU to insert or even push forward any kind of progress in the societal level, including democratization, including human rights movement, including the enhancement of how people should voice out in Myanmar. Now, let's take a look at the first question, right? We would like to ultimately make the democratization or democracy in Myanmar even more stronger. The strategy that we see from China going into Myanmar or any countries in the same regime, for example, North Korea, for example, Vietnam, that actually shares some sort of characteristic with Myanmar, which is first, it's in a way very little democracy or non-democracy at all. The idea is this: the very regime within China itself is communist and socialist. The very closest linkage that China has within these societies is that it wants to push forward what has existed in China and insert it into as many countries as possible. The only way that they do it is through economic ties. How China is investing more and actually the only trade partner of North Korea and Myanmar as of status quo is the way that China is putting more and more leverage on how they actually have this political leverage on negotiating and changing any kind of values within these societies. And we think that is bad. Because why? The impact of China going into being a partner or the major, or if not the only of these countries, especially Myanmar, is that it's not just a money transaction, right? Because first, it actually put values, or the fact that they actually go in, it gives them more leverage economically. The only trade partner that Myanmar has right now is for China. Thus, the interdependency or even the reliance that Myanmar has on China as of status quo make them have to be more negotiative, or make them have to be more softer towards China government, or any kind of request or any kind of values that China would like to insert. For example, the oppressive, how China is being careless on the oppressive workforce, as we have seen that we have always seen in China, and thus enhancing the very problem that Myanmar never recognized that human right in the first place. Well, before I move on to the second part, yes.
Burmese government incentive is to limit trade and limit foreign influence. We see with lifting sanctions, there won't be any change anyway.
the very problem in today's debate is whether or not the EU should actually pursue to open up trade with Myanmar in the first place. Because Myanmar is not the one trying to push the sanctioning down on its own land. China would like to liberalize in order to get any kind of foreign investor, in order to boost its own economy. The only problem now is actually the actor coming from the EU and the rest of the world that is not able to recognize the fact that economic tie that they would like to, that they need to make in order to make change is actually something very, very important. Now, right, let me move on as to why exactly these economic ties would then put any kind of change within Myanmar. Firstly, we believe that's exactly the same reason why Thailand can never and ever had any kind of thought of sanctioning Burma in the first place. Because Thailand knows that once it cuts off this very last tie with Myanmar, it can never have any kind of negotiable ideas when it comes to the border connections, or any kind of ideas when they want to insert some sort of values or actually put a helping hand. For example, the only help that Burma was able to accept or was willing to accept in the case of flooding and in the case of storms a few years ago was from Thailand. Because we never ever cut these very ties. We never treat them as enemies, and we never put a hard power that condemned them to be someone that is bad. We use the very method of communication and use its leverage of having the economic tie with them, right? So on the second level, we believe that once Myanmar is actually seeing EU as a non-existent to them. There is no incentive for them to move anywhere forward the democratic values that they have. But on the last and very important thing is that why is it that EU is actually having the incentive to go in the first place? In order to compete with the very rising economy of China, we cannot neglect the fact that political standards or political values is actually something that is very important in terms of trading, in terms of how governments see things on the same page, right? If EU neglects this very progress into communism or into socialism within Burma itself, that's actually neglecting the very resources, the very possible potential market within Myanmar, and we believe that is a very wrong way that EU as an economic bloc wants to take in this particular case. So now, right, I have proven to you why this economic leverage, this interdependency between trade partners actually gives some sort of influence on how they put things on the ground of Myanmar. We believe that once you treat them as enemy, your enemy would never listen to anything you would like to force on them or even influence on them. For all that reason, we're proud to propose.
The speaker spoke for 7 minutes and 20